You're outnumbered. Badly. The forest behind you is silent. Ancient oaks and dark soil, slick with rain. Ahead stretches open ground, flat, endless, and waiting. You hear them before you see them. The thunder of feet, the rattle of carts, the scream of horns echoing off hills. Inside your helmet, the sound thins. All you hear is your own breathing. 1 breath. 2. Then the first rush hits the shields. It's chaos. Voices lost in iron. Ground shaking under weight. The line bends, shields grind. And you think, this is where it breaks. But it doesn't. Because the Roman army doesn't break. It holds. And what decides this fight isn't size. It's discipline, position, the ground under your feet. This isn't a story about strength. It's a story about control. How a small Roman force turned terrain, training, and nerve into the deadliest weapons in Britain. To understand how 10,000 Roman soldiers faced an army more than 20 times their size, we need to go back to the spark that set the island on fire. Picture Britain in the 1st century. Not the rolling green hills of postcards, but a Roman frontier. Wild forests, cold rivers, and tribes watching every road. For years, Rome had ruled through local kings, tribal leaders who answered to the empire. They kept peace, they paid taxes. It worked. Until one died. His name was Prasutagus, ruler of the Iceni, a tribe in eastern Britain. When he died, he left his lands jointly to his family and to Rome, hoping to keep both sides content. But the empire doesn't share. Roman officials arrived to seize his property as though it were theirs. His widow, Boudica, was beaten in public. Her daughters were assaulted. That single act, the humiliation of a queen, set a match to dry grass. Across the island, word spread. The tribes rose. First the Iceni, then the Trinovantes, then others who'd long hidden their resentment. They struck at Roman towns that had once been symbols of civilization. Camulodunum, modern Colchester, was the first to fall. The Roman colonists barricaded themselves in a temple to the emperor. It burned around them. Then the rebels marched south. Longinium, London, the heart of trade. Its streets were packed with civilians begging for protection. When the Roman commander realized he couldn't defend it, he ordered an evacuation. Those who stayed behind were slaughtered. Archaeologists today can still trace that destruction. A dark red layer of ash, splintered pottery, and melted coins under modern London. It's the physical scar of that uprising. Next came Verulamium, St. Albans, torched the same way. By now, the death toll reached tens of thousands. And where was Rome's governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus? Far away. He'd been leading a campaign on the island of Anglesey, off the coast of Wales, a stronghold of the Druids, the spiritual leaders of Celtic resistance. His army was deep in hostile territory when the news reached him. A single rider found him, cloak stiff with sea salt, eyes hollow, voice raw from shouting through days of rain. "Governor, Britain burns!" He turned his army around immediately, marching south, hard. He had only about 10,000 men, veterans of the 14th Gemina and 20th Valeria Victrix legions, hardened soldiers used to impossible odds, plus a few cohorts of auxiliary troops. On paper, they were doomed. The rebel army was said to number over 200,000. But Suetonius wasn't thinking about numbers. He was thinking about ground. Rome had lost cities before, but it never lost a lesson. If he couldn't outnumber them, he would outthink them. He would make the battlefield itself fight for him. That decision would lead to one of the most brutal and brilliant defenses Rome ever staged, on a field whose name was never recorded, but whose shape would change the island forever. When the governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, turned his column south from the Druid fires of Anglesey. He wasn't chasing glory. He was chasing time. Behind him, the sacred groves still smoldered. Ahead, half of Britain was burning. The reports were almost too brutal to believe. 3 great Roman settlements had fallen in a storm of vengeance: Camulodunum, Londinium, Verulamium. Thousands dead, temples gutted. The 9th Legion, one of Rome's proudest, ambushed and torn apart on the march north. The cause was rebellion, yes, but deeper. It was humiliation turned into fire. A wronged queen, Boudica of the Iceni, had taken her vengeance and drawn half the island's tribes to her banner. Now she marched east with a host that shook the roads. Men, women, wagons, warriors and children. A tide of fury moving toward the last Roman stand. Suetonius had maybe 10,000 men left, legionaries of the 14th and parts of the 20th, a few auxiliary cohorts, a handful of cavalry. Trained, yes. Hardened, yes. But against the wave coming their way, it looked like madness to stand. And yet, that's exactly what he chose to do. Because for all her fire, Boudica had one weakness: speed. Her army moved like weather, fast, unpredictable, and impossible to control once it broke. Suetonius knew if he ran, he'd be swallowed. So instead, he stopped. He would fight, but on ground that made size mean nothing. He searched the landscape until he found it. A narrow valley hemmed in by wooded ridges on both sides. A funnel-shaped plain that widened just enough to draw the enemy in before closing like a vice. Behind, a dense forest wall. In front, a flat strip of hard earth. No bog, no slope, no place to circle. To the untrained eye, it looked open. To a soldier, it was perfect. Here, he could make the ground itself an ally. The forest sealed his flanks. The funnel forced the enemy to come straight on. No sweeping charge, no surprise from the side. The geometry of the field would do the work that numbers could not. So he anchored his line against the trees. The 14th Legion in the center, auxiliary cohorts on each wing, and a slim screen of cavalry hidden behind. Every man was ordered to hold until the order came. The open plain ahead became more than just space. It became the stage where the trap would spring. To an advancing horde, the scene looked ideal. Flat ground, no walls, no trenches, the kind of field where speed wins. But the closer they came, the tighter the space became. Tens of thousands pressing forward into a corridor only wide enough for a few hundred at a time. A battlefield that looked like freedom, but functioned like a bottleneck. Boudica's warriors saw the Romans standing in perfect silence, a single red wall of shields gleaming under the grey sky. No motion, no shouts, just formation. To her, it must have looked like defiance, a few thousand men waiting to die on their feet. But that stillness wasn't fear, it was calculation. Behind the first rank, men braced their scooter, the heavy curved shields, edge to edge, forming a living wall. Behind them, others planted the iron tips of their peeler, long javelins designed not just to pierce, but to bend, to stick, to break a shield and the man behind it. Each centurion walked the line once more, checking ranks, adjusting stances, murmuring orders that had been drilled since before the men could grow beards. No charge, no chaos, just rhythm. Hold, wait, breathe. The Legion was a machine wound tight, a pattern of motion built for one thing, turning rage into ruin. From the crest behind them, you could see it clearly. the narrow mouth of the valley yawning toward the open plain. And in that mouth, the first dust of the oncoming host rising like smoke. You hear them before you see them. The pounding of hooves, the rattle of wheels, the thunder of voices chanting the names of their tribes. Their banners twist in the wind. Boar tusks, painted horses, bronze faces catching light. The horizon moves, and then it isn't a horizon anymore. It's a sea of bodies. 200,000, maybe more, crashing forward in one wild surge. And waiting for them, a single Roman line, small enough to fit between the trees. But that was the trick. The field wasn't wide enough for 200,000. It could only fit 10,000 at a time. The rest, trapped behind, shouting, pushing, pressing, would crush their own before ever touching a Roman shield. Suetonius had built a machine out of dirt and distance. The forest at his back was armor, the funnel ahead was a blade, and the open plain between them was the killing ground. Now the pieces were in place. The wagons of the tribes rolled in behind their warriors, heavy with family and pride, their women and children watching from the rear as if the fight were a festival. They thought the sight of home would strengthen their men. They didn't yet know it had already sealed their fate. Because when pride stands behind you and iron waits ahead, there's only one direction to go. And the field you choose decides what kind of story history tells next. That's when the fatal audience took their seats. What kind of army brings its families to a battlefield? The rebels did. Behind the British ranks stretched wagons and carts in long rows, a wall of wood, wheels, and people. Wives holding water skins, elders sitting on crates of grain, children peering over the sides, watching fathers sharpen blades. To the rebels it looked like pride, a victory parade before the battle even began. Their families would see them crush the empire that had humiliated their queen. They believed the gods themselves were watching, but the Romans saw something else. Those wagons formed a cage. Behind the cheering crowds, the open ground was gone. If the front ranks ever faltered, there would be nowhere to run. Suetonius had fought long enough to recognize the pattern. He'd seen it before, in Spain, in Africa, wherever desperate armies brought everything they loved to the field. It made men fearless at first, then helpless later. Because when your family watches, you fight harder. But if the tide turns, you freeze. You can't run when running means abandoning everything you came to protect. The wagons sealed their fate before a single spear flew. The rebel host stretched far across the plain, a sea of tribes, banners, and noise. War carts creaked and rattled. Horns howled, drums pounded. To the Romans, it looked endless. But to Suetonius, it looked trapped. He saw the narrow mouth of the valley, the only way in or out. He saw the wagons closing the exit behind them. And he knew, when that crowd surged forward, it would crush itself against his shields. Every inch of that open field would soon become a bottleneck, and the ground itself would decide who lived. It begins with a roar. Tens of thousands of warriors surge forward, painted faces streaked blue, hair braided, weapons flashing in the sun. They scream the names of their tribes. They rush down the slope, a flood of noise and fury. For a heartbeat, even the Romans feel it, the vibration through the ground, the shock of the charge. And then the first command rings out, "Pila, ready!" A storm of Roman javelins arcs into the crowd. The long iron shafts punch through shields, bend on impact, and drag them down with their weight. 1,000 arms lose balance, 1,000 shields drop. Then the second command: draw swords! Close ranks. The wall moves forward, one step, then another. Shields lock rim to rim. Short swords thrust in tight rhythm. The gladius doesn't need space, it only needs inches. Roman soldiers don't fight as individuals. They fight as links in a single machine, every movement drilled until instinct. Step, block, thrust. Step, block, thrust. The rebels slam into that wall, expecting it to crumble. Instead, it swallows the impact. Spears splinter, swords glance off metal. Men at the front stumble, pushed by those behind. The crush grows so tight they can't raise their arms to strike. The Romans hold. Then, the counter-push. Advance! The whole line moves as one, a living wedge of iron. Every foot gained is carved, not taken. The open plain, once the rebels' pride, becomes their enemy. There's no room to spread, no flank to turn. They've walked into a funnel, and the funnel is closing. The first wave breaks, bodies fall, trampled by the next. The momentum dies, replaced by panic. A warrior turns to pull back, but there's nowhere to go. The wagons and families block the way. And that's when the Romans push again. Shields forward, swords flashing, step, block, thrust. Over and over until the noise of the crowd becomes one long cry. It isn't a battle anymore. It's pressure. Pure, relentless pressure. The discipline of 10,000 men crushing the chaos of 200,000. Then it happens. The crowd at the front, crushed and bleeding, starts to fall back, straight into the people behind them. Mothers scream, horses rear, wagons tip and block the field. The first warriors who turn to flee hit wood. The wagons that once carried families now fence them in. Behind the carts there's only more panic. Children, supplies, animals, all jammed together. The trapped mass turns on itself. Men climb wheels and fall. Spears drop and stab allies. The line collapses from its own weight. That's when Suetonius gives the order. Cavalry. The Roman horsemen waiting at the edges sweep around the flanks, cutting through the sides of the mob like a blade through cloth. They ride fast and low, stabbing at backs, driving the chaos inward. There's nowhere left to go. Each path turns into a trap. Men trip over bodies. Wagons burn. The open field that once looked like victory becomes a grave. When the sound finally dies, it's not triumph that fills the air. It's silence. A silence so heavy even the Romans stop moving. Around them lie tens of thousands of bodies, warriors, families, animals, crushed together where the field closed. Rome had faced rebellion, rage and chaos, and answered it not with greater force, but with precision, patience, and ground. The field had done half the killing. The plan had done the rest. From that day, the tribes of Britain would never again gather a host that size. The rebellion was over, but the lesson, the one written into the dirt, would last far longer than the men who fought there. When the dust finally settled, the valley still steamed from blood and rain. Smoke drifted from burned carts. Shields lay half buried in mud, and the only sound left was the slow clang of armor. Soldiers collecting their fallen, one by one. For Rome, the day had been victory. For the rebels, it was the end of a dream. Where 10,000 stood disciplined, More than 200,000 had broken. But the aftermath wasn't celebration. It was work and consequence. Governor Suetonius, the man who'd chosen that narrow field, now held a province in shock. Entire towns had burned. Fields lay empty. Traders stayed behind closed doors. The tribes that had once cheered their queen now scattered in silence. At first, Rome's answer was fire for fire. Villages were leveled. Leaders were hunted down. Every field that had fed the uprising was salted with fear. The message was simple. The empire still ruled this island. But even in Rome, far from the smoke, the senators whispered the same question. Had Britain been pacified or just broken? Emperor Nero himself, safe in his marble halls, worried that another spark might rise. He ordered inquiry instead of vengeance. Suetonius, the governor who'd won the battle, was recalled to Rome, replaced by a calmer hand. And under this new rule, the violence cooled. Roman engineers rebuilt what the fire had eaten. Roads spread like veins across the island again. Towns rose where ashes had been, straighter, stronger, quieter. They didn't rebuild out of kindness. They rebuilt because Rome had learned a truth as old as its legions. Control cannot live on fear alone. You can crush rebellion for a day, but peace, real peace, needs something steadier. So they turned from punishment to permanence. Outposts became forts. Forts became towns. Walls thickened, bridges rose, and the empire's presence dug in deep. Every soldier who'd survived the battle carried the same story home. How 10,000 had stood against a storm, how the forest had saved them, and how precision had beaten passion. In barracks and drill yards, the lesson was spoken again and again. Pick your ground. Hold your line. Let the enemy feed your plan. That mantra outlived the soldiers who said it. It became part of Roman doctrine, the kind of wisdom written not on paper but in scars. Years later, when new legions crossed into strange lands, Parthia, Judea, Germania, they remembered the valley where the small army won, and how the empire learned that discipline, not size, keeps the world under your heel. The field where the Romans stood still exists. Now it's just grass, wind, and the faint outline of an old ditch. But if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear the rhythm. Boots striking mud, shields locking, the heartbeat of discipline. 10,000 men, outnumbered more than 20 to 1, and yet they turned a slaughter into survival, not by strength, but by geometry. They chose a place where courage met strategy, where trees guarded their backs and the earth narrowed the odds. The field itself became an ally, a silent accomplice that swallowed chaos and gave order room to breathe. That's the lasting lesson of the battle. Size is loud, but skill is patient. Noise fades, structure endures. Across history, from empire to empire, that pattern repeats. The proud, the furious, the confident charge forward. The disciplined wait, choose ground, and let pride undo itself. Think of it anywhere power gathers, in boardrooms, war rooms, nations. The biggest doesn't always win. The one that listens to the ground does. When you strip away the banners and the noise, this isn't just a story about Romans or rebels. It's about how control survives, how patience and planning outlive rage. If this story shifted how you see strength, share it. And if you want more moments where history turns on a single decision, subscribe and step into the next field. Because history always leaves a lesson buried somewhere underfoot. You just have to listen for it.